Warning! This video contains almost no bile whatsoever, and is possibly the soppiest video that I've ever made. Yeah, get your sick bags at the ready, people. This is a He Who Moans guide to Big Finish for beginners. This is He Who Moans, Doctor Who reviews. I only complain because I like Doctor Who, and I care. And I overanalyze too much because, whatever, it's just my opinion. Hey everybody, so we're back here again. So, I've been meaning to cover this one for quite some time now, since I get asked like once a week or thereabouts, for my recommendations for the best Doctor Who releases by Big Finish Productions, the upstart independent audio drama production company who receive endless tongue baths by moody neckbeards like myself. And it looks like it's time for me to give them another one. I would mostly recommend Big Finish for people who already have an appreciation for audio drama to begin with. If you're totally alien to the non-visual world, it can take a while for you to get to grips with it, and it's just not for some people. I get that, but personally I find the visuals not being there to be just as effective, if not more so. Audio drama allows for some incredibly creative environments for stories, and no budget required. It just takes some imagination to let your mind wander into these stories. And speaking as a Radio 4 nerd, and who needs something to entertain him during long work commutes in and out of London, they're entirely designed for someone like me, and that's exaggerated my intense love of Big Finish. In fact, I'd probably say that I like Big Finish more than Classic Who, or any other Doctor Who related medium. They do have their off days, as you'd expect, we're none of us perfect after all, but they're usually very, very consistent. So I've picked 12 stories that any hardcore Whovians deep into their Classic Who should probably check out at some point if they haven't already. Why have I done 12? Because I'm different, okay? So yeah, these ones aren't necessarily their best ones, or even my favourite ones, or even ones I'd call essential. Some of them are, but they're just on the more accessible end for anyone new to Big Finish, since there are quite a lot of really notable releases that are completely impenetrable to new listeners, such as Zagreus. They're more at liberty to do really complex and self-indulgent stuff, since they do recognise that their target audience is most likely to primarily be said neckbeards, who are more hardcore into Doctor Who lore than most people. But the following ones on this list I'd call entry points, and I've also been careful to pick mostly, but not totally, ones that are cheap to download or buy on CD if it's not out of print yet, because yeah, Big Finish are notoriously expensive, and you'd go bankrupt in a month trying to enjoy every end of their output, especially since they've put out hundreds and hundreds of productions. Not all of them are Doctor Who related as well. So I'll only be mentioning a couple of more recent ones, as the older ones are only $2.99 on download for any paupers out there watching this who are looking to get into some Big Finish, and there are some real gems there in the early days. The expensive costs I do think are justified though. They're an independent company granted licence by the BBC and are still catering for strange people like me who are nutcases for CDs in a digital age. I think that's respectable. I'd also like to note, in case anyone from Big Finish is watching, whoever it was that suggested the idea that I saw in your last customer survey to have a Big Finish streaming service where you can pay for a month's subscription and stream anything that you want in that time, whoever suggested that really should be given a promotion, a medal and unlimited rice pudding, as that is the best idea that I've ever heard in the history of anything, and you should totally go ahead and do it. Big Finish streaming service. Get on it, people. Suggestion 1. Anyone watching this who's already versed in Big Finish will see this one coming, so let's get it out of the way with now. Spare parts. Yeah, it's the obvious starting point for anyone new to Big Finish, as it is every bit as good as everyone says it is. I don't think anyone didn't want a Genesis of the Cybermen story. It's one of those obvious ideas that you're shocked hadn't been done previously, and the writer of Ghostlight and popular Big Finish mainstay Mark Platt did about as perfect a job as anyone could be expected to do. It's one of few Doctor Who stories that I can't see a flaw in. Yvonne and her family are just such vivid characters from the second they get introduced to that powerful finale, which is just really dark and introspective. Spare Parts really is about as utterly brilliant as Doctor Who comes, and it presents a nihilistic situation and doesn't pull any punches. This is Doctor Who at its least patronising and friendly, and with one of its strongest sets of characters, and it's just downright gripping. It really is an experience you need to have right now, and is one of the finest things with the words Doctor Who printed on it. Yes, I mean that. Suggestion 2. The Marian Conspiracy. Yeah, I've picked this one because it's Evelyn's introductory story. History professor Evelyn Smythe is probably one of my favourite companions and was instrumental in Big Finish's earliest project, to redeem the Sixth Doctor in the eyes of the incredibly touchy fan base, which they succeeded in doing to an astonishing degree. I was unsure about Evelyn at first, but I did really warm to her over the course of this story. And as I've said before, Evelyn was what balanced out Six's brash and arrogant personality because of how much she spoke her mind, and it kind of makes me think that Season 22 wouldn't have had such a mixed reception if it had been Six, Perry and Evelyn in the TARDIS. Really, imagine Season 22 with Evelyn on board the TARDIS. Like, that would be a much stronger balance of personality types. I think we probably wouldn't be looking back with such disdain over the Sixth Doctor's era. She's a history professor in her mid-50s, and while she's unlike the companion archetype, at least in her character background, Evelyn has a real passion for exploring the history that she's dedicated her life to studying, and the Marian Conspiracy is the obvious thing that you would do with a character like this. It takes Evelyn back to the time of Queen Mary, a historical figure that Evelyn despises, and who's gone down as a ruthless bloody tyrant, and while yes, she is presented as a ruthless bloody tyrant in this one does a great and believable job of hammering home just how much historical revisionism has gone on over the years. 'Cause, yeah, it obviously has. Mary isn't presented in this one like a cackling villain going, "Moo ha 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 ha, I am going to step on a basket full of puppies." She's very much a human doing what she sees as right, which always requires context to the period, and while yes, she is a misguided maniac, it's a way more interesting approach at painting a picture of a historical figure, and many aspects of that period, than most representations of it that you see in pop culture and movies, which often veer into caricature. Broadening a history professor's horizons about her specialist subject with the actual history is something that you're shocked Doctor Who hadn't tapped into before. It's a really simple idea, but it's really effective. You may be unsure about it because it's a pure historical, as the pure historicals are usually loved by some fans, or a bit of an unknown quantity for others rather than loved or hated, mostly because most of the really famous ones are either missing or partially missing, but Big Finish do pure historicals all the time, and the Marian Conspiracy is a great example of recreating the pure historical with the sci-fi elements of our main cast, while keeping it fun and interesting enough with some great twists, and if you were unsure of the pure historicals before, I reckon this one might change your mind. Suggestion 3. Live 34, which is quite honestly one of my favourite things of all time. It's a prime example of Big Finish's experimental nature, as it's presented quite unlike any other story you'd care to name. It's literally a fictional news broadcast from an Earth space colony, which has slowly become a benign shadowy dictatorship through corruption and faked terrorist bombings to keep people scared and stupid. And over the broadcast, the Doctor and his friends show up in stories and features as they organise a revolution to expose the government for what it really is. Its simplicity is where it succeeds here. It's honestly amazing that no one's thought to do something like this before. It's one of those stories which is a sci-fi satire without being funny. And what a biting satire. I mean, really, this is an intensely nasty confrontational sci-fi satire with an incredibly unique conceit to it, ripping the guts out of its real-life counterpart while doing so. Lots of people really hate the ending to this one, which, yes, it does feel like quite a lot of heavy-handed expositional dialogue, and it does kind of feel like ideally we would have needed another part before this finale to it, because Live 34, while being 100 minutes long, it strangely ended up being a victim of 45-minute syndrome somehow, which honestly, looking back at it now, I think I really should retitle Needs More Time syndrome. But personally, I think that what they've done to allow for the expositional dialogue justifies it artistically, and the ending does make sense, and it's like a crowbar to the face. It's really dark. Suggestion 4. I feel that I should mention Jonathan Morris at this point, as him and Mark Platt are the two Big Finish writers that I'd really love to see make the jump to New Who one of these days. Because I've really enjoyed quite a lot of his output. I've been following his Doctor Who work since the Tomorrow Windows in 2005, which is a really, really great 8th Doctor book that you should totally check out if you can find a copy. And while Morris is clearly a comedy-focused guy, he's written a wide range of styles for Big Finish and the books range, showcasing that he's a very versatile writer. Aside from the Tomorrow Windows, I personally prefer his morbid and bleak stuff to his comedy stuff, which brings me to Protect and Survive. I've included it on the list because it's probably the modicum of Big Finish's stronger focus on its adult audience. They realised quite a long time ago that lots of their listeners will be adults with Doctor Who nostalgia, so quite a lot of the monthly series, especially the 7th Doctor releases, take a much darker tone, which of course is something that Moffat pretends that he has the freedom to do. Yeah, that's probably why I've sneered at those claims that the new series is a really dark one, because I'm used to Big Finish's approach when it comes to dark and morbid, as it's very unrestrained, and yes, I realise that lots of the stuff that Big Finish do you probably couldn't do on TV at 7 o'clock. Right from the beginning with the 7th Doctor, there were tricklings of that dark tone that we had in the last couple of series of Classic Who, but the ante's certainly been upped, and Protect and Survive is a great demonstration of that. Of course, I do assume that you know what Protect and Survive was. Everyone does. It's one of the scariest real things from the Cold War public fear period of the mid-80s. If you haven't seen the video of it, I definitely recommend you check it out, as this one's heavily reliant on it to affect you emotionally, and the presence of Protect and Survive as the theme, it makes it feel much more visceral. It's best you know as little as possible going in, so the scene is the Doctor is missing and Ace and Hex wind up in a country house where there's an elderly couple preparing a fallout room in the event of nuclear war. I'd basically call it the threads of Doctor Who, and while the second half does go a bit off the rails and corny, it's still heaps morbid and a really fun listen. Suggestion 5. Home Truths is the companion chronicle story that I'd recommend. They're a series of talking books, short stories read by a narrator, usually someone who played a companion during the eras of Doctors 1 through 4, though occasionally there's an 8 or a 7 in there. My favourite writer for the companion chronicles is Simon Guerrier, who does some really atmospheric work with them. And Home Truths is probably his most impressive one, since he's one of few writers who's managed to find something that you can do with Sarah Kingdom, whose short-lived time on the series and how her story played out left little for the expanded universe to believably expand on, but his 3 Sarah Kingdom tales managed to continue her story rather effortlessly, and I should mention that the music used in them is absolutely perfect. In Home Truths, Sarah, Stephen and the Doctor arrive at a bizarre house like out of a fairy tale, and unfortunately I can't tell you more about it without ruining it, but this is how you do terrifying without venturing into over-the-top and stupid. It's incredibly atmospheric and a simple and effective horror story. Personally, I'd call this one Big Finish's Blink. Suggestion 6. I'm kind of cheating with this next one and having the complete 4-part mini-series about the origins of the creator of the Daleks, suitably titled
I, Davros.
This series is fairly cheap to buy, and given it's building off of Genesis of the Daleks as a template, you're going to be fairly familiar enough with what this is going to sound like going in. The tone's very similar to Genesis, and lots of the music is either recreated or expanded on, but prepare to be surprised here. Genesis of the Daleks was fairly nasty for what is ostensibly a kids' show, but as much as we knew that Davros probably had a very messed up youth and early life, if this was done on TV, we'd be looking at something very unlike the friendly show that we know nowadays. Yeah, I, Davros, can give you nightmares. As you'd expect of a series set in a nuclear wasteland during a war to the death about space Nazis, forcing their people to mutate into grotesque Lovecraftian monsters. There's no man in a blue box coming to save the day here, and some of the evil stuff that Davros does in this, and he hadn't totally lost his mind by this point. Yeah, it's incredibly heavy going and morbid, and it sort of makes me think that HBO would get a kick out of doing something like this on TV for a Game of Thrones tending audience. Just to build on something that's not just a classic, but what's widely considered to be the classic. Like, if you've seen any Classic Who, chances are it's Genesis of the Daleks, and to keep the tone and doom-laden feel of Genesis and expand on lots of the ideas it presents and do them total justice, it definitely feels like an exploration of the same world that we saw in Genesis. It was a daring attempt, and to come out of doing so with a prequel to what's seen as Classic Who's ultimate high point with such great results is really something to be applauded. And now the ones that most Big Finish nerds will tell you to check out. Suggestions 7 through 12. The Rob Sherman plays. Yeah, Sherman's a favourite of both people who love everything Doctor Who and cynics like myself for good reason. The interesting thing about Sherman's Doctor Who stories is I wouldn't say they're totally like Classic Who stories. He has his own unique quirks when it comes to dialogue and a focus on meta-humour, which is great for Classic Who nerds eager for someone to expand on its formulas. He kind of exists on his own plane. Not quite New Who, not quite Classic Who, not quite Big Finish's usual fare. You know that you're listening to a Rob Sherman script when you're hearing it. He has such a unique style that you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who's managed to imitate him successfully, and the 6 full stories that he did for Big Finish are just so damn interesting. He did quite a lot for Big Finish's redemption of the 6th Doctor from his lower position in most fans' eyes by giving him 3 of his best stories. Jubilee you're probably sort of familiar with through vague elements of it being cut and pasted into his only new Who script Dalek, but it's a very different story and, like lots of his work, requires being very unfamiliar going in to let it surprise you. But let me just set the scene. The Doctor and Evelyn arrive in an alternate Britain where she and the Doctor are said to have helped defeat the Daleks 100 years back, and now Britain's turned into a jingoistic society that's absorbed Daleks into popular culture, kinda like British society did after defeating the Nazis. It asks questions about the victors glorying in the defeat of their enemies. You know what I'm talking about. The Nazis have pretty much become the butt of every war joke for being responsible for one of the worst wartime atrocities in recent memory. But what does what we've done with the Nazis in pop culture say about us? And yes, it's a difficult subject, and Jubilee can be quite fucked up in quite a lot of places, but damn is it an interesting one. His earlier one, The Holy Terror, approaches religion, and it's also got a really interesting villain in it that hammers home the message regarding shutting off all outside influence and questioning one's internal belief system. Genius thing about Holy Terror as well is it's not necessarily attacking the concept of religion. It just rearranges elements seen in many religions across the world into its own closed-off society, asking whether these elements of religion are inherently flawed or are just used by people in the wrong way to hide some deeper hidden problems with the world. Also, it has Frobisher the Talking Penguin. Sherman also penned The Maltese Penguin, which is an hour-long bonus release with Frobisher, and it's probably Big Finish's most fun and accessible release, and is kind of breaking new ground for a series all about breaking new ground. Frobisher being a penguin who's a private eye who talks in a film noir voice meant that it was kind of obvious to do a film noir on his home planet of talking animals. But simple ideas are often the best ones, and it is kind of like Doctor Who done as a Saturday morning kids cartoon, and it's honestly one of the most absurdly imaginative things that you'd care to name. And Sherman is the master of memorable dialogue, and it's definitely the most that I've laughed at a Doctor Who release. Frobisher's just so much fun to be around, and it really surprises me that this and Holy Terror are the only 2 releases that Robert Jesek's been featured on, as he's about as perfect casting as it comes. But yeah, the settings and characters are really creative, and as I've made it clear, I really like it when Doctor Who plays fast and loose with the word reality, and the Maltese Penguin does that perfectly, and if you're new to Big Finish, you'll find it really friendly and really accessible. Sherman also wrote for the Doctor Who Unbound series, which is basically what-if questions concerning Doctor Who history, and he did one asking the question, what if Doctor Who had never been made in the first place? And he came out with Deadline, a depressingly bleak piece about a writer nearing the end of his life, a bitter old man who lost everything, wondering whether never writing Doctor Who was where it all went wrong, and going a bit mad. Yeah, I know, I'm giving you some fun things to muse on, aren't I? Yeah, Deadline is really introspective and asks some interesting questions about life motivations of writers and whether they sacrifice living full lives with the people they love for their demented creations and whether that's really the right thing to do. And just the ending of this one is so soul-rendering that really, if you write, you really need to hear this one. It won't be a fun listen, it'll probably traumatise you to be honest with the very thing that you love, but damn does it make you think. The 2 plays that he wrote for Paul McGann's Doctor, Chimes of Midnight and Scherzo, I'm going to deal with in a review project that I've been working on for some time, where I go through every play featuring Paul McGann from Storm Warning through to Dark Eyes, which will be surfacing on my channel at some point. Mostly because the 8th Doctor plays are one long continuous story, and sometimes a story requires prior context. But Chimes of Midnight always holds a special place for me because it was the first Big Finish story that I ever heard. It's a sci-fi repurposing of traditional murder mystery elements, funny on many occasions and genuinely scary on others, and the other one is Scherzo, one of the downright strangest things in Doctor Who canon, as it's set in a dimension inconceivable in R1. And it's a massive headfuck. Notable mentions that I'll probably get around to discussing at some point include the criminally underrated Creatures of Beauty, personal favourite the Cyberman miniseries, and of course that one. So, yeah, there you go. I know Big Finish seems like this immense impenetrable fortress, but it does have its entry points. Just know your limits, because you really don't want to end up a payday lender if you get in too deep. Yeah, Big Finish, please. That streaming service is a really good idea. Please go for it.